Hello again. In this final part 3 of chapter 18, I will go over the last two questions on describing the governmental and legal changes Napoleon made, and finally we will summarize the defeat that he suffered. In 1815 he is finally defeated. He was defeated the year before, but he comes back from exile. He dominated both French and European history from 1799 through 1815. He had been born in Corsica in 1769, and he was taken to France and he studied in the new military schools. He was a lieutenant when the revolution broke out, and the revolution and the European War that followed gave him opportunities for advancement, and he took them. He rose quickly through the ranks. In 1794, at only age 25, he was made a brigadier general. Napoleon was a master military strategist. 2 years later, he commanded the French armies in Italy, where he won a series of victories, and he returned to France as a conquering hero. And there's an excerpt in the textbook if you want to read more on that. After a disastrous campaign in Egypt, he returned to Paris, where he participated in the coup that gave him control of France. He was only 30 years old. After the coup of 1799, a new form of the Republic called the Consulate was proclaimed, in which Napoleon, as first consul, controlled the entire executive authority of the government. He had overwhelming influence over the legislature. He appointed members of the administrative bureaucracy, he commanded the army, and he conducted foreign affairs. In 1802, he was made consul for life, and in 1804, he returned France to monarchy when he became Emperor Napoleon I. And that's a picture of the coronation, and he is going to place the crown on the Queen Josephine while the Pope looks on. This is in 1804. He makes peace with the church. He recognized that Catholicism was the religion of the majority of the French people. In return, the Pope agreed not to challenge the confiscation of church lands during the Revolution. But domestically, and this directly answers the major governmental and legal changes, the most lasting thing he did was the codification of laws, which are largely still used today. Before the Revolution, recognizing all equality of all citizens before the law, the abolition of serfdom and feudalism, and religious toleration, property rights were also protected. Again, the major contribution was he made a unified set codified laws instead of all of the different regional laws that had existed before this time. The revolutionary committees had attempted to do this, but they weren't successful. Napoleon finished the job. And these are the main lasting things that were set into code by Napoleon. He also developed a powerful centralized administration and worked hard to develop a bureaucracy of capable officials. Early on, the regime showed that it cared little whether the officials had acquired their expertise in royal or revolutionary bureaucracies. Promotion, whether in civil or military offices, was based not on rank or birth, but on ability only. He preserved some aspects of the revolution. Although equality was preserved in the law code and an opening of careers to talent, the creation of a new aristocracy, the strong protection accorded to property rights, and the use of conscription or the draft for the military made it clear that much equality had been lost. That goes away. That part of the revolution is not part of the French system from this time on. Liberty is not valued as highly as it is in other Western countries. And it was replaced by initially a benevolent despotism, but that grew increasingly arbitrary. And they're going to have a series of governmental downfalls and new republics being born all through the 19th century. Since the revolution in 1789, France is on their fifth government now. This latest government dates from 1962. Napoleon was also very dictatorial in closing down many newspapers. This leads into the last question now. This is Napoleon at his height. This is 1807. He is the master of Europe in this year. This is the French Empire. The green is their empire. The blue are areas that are under French control, and the brown areas are allied to France. And this is how he set up the continental system to try and defeat their bitter enemy, Great Britain. He hoped that this empire would last for centuries, but it collapsed almost as rapidly as it had been formed. As long as Britain ruled the waves or the sea, and Great Britain is the most powerful seafaring country on the planet in these years, it was not subject to military attack. He hoped to invade Britain, but he could not overcome the Navy's decisive defeat of the combined French and Spanish fleet at Trafalgar. That's Admiral Nelson, famous British naval hero. He defeated these forces at Trafalgar. And the continental system was basically a trade embargo where they tried to prevent anything from being traded to the continent of Europe, but this system did not work because the Brits were able to evade it, and they were still able to wage war. The Russians didn't want to stay in the continental system, and Napoleon has no choice. If he's going to enforce his will, if they're going to stick by his leadership, he's going to have to enforce this system. So he invaded Russia, and this is his biggest mistake, and this is the beginning of the end of Napoleon. In June of 1812, he led his grand army of more than 600,000 men into Russia. His hopes for victory, he was hoping to quickly defeat them. But the Russian forces kept retreating and retreating, and as they retreated, they destroyed everything in its path. And therefore, the French could not live off the land at all because everything was destroyed, and they're running out of supplies. And because of this, in late October, they eventually abandoned Moscow, and they began a retreat across Russia, and General Winter then almost destroys the French army. Only 40,000 men of the original 600,000 arrived back in Poland in January of 1813. That's unbelievable losses. And because of that, other European states now sense weakness on the part of France and Napoleon, and they attacked the crippled French army. Paris was captured in March of 1814, and Napoleon was sent into exile for the first time on the island of Elba, just off the coast of Italy. Meanwhile, the Bourbon monarchy was restored in the person of Louis XVIII, the brother of the executed king. The son of Louis XVI had died in prison at the age of 10. Napoleon came back into France, and when troops were sent to capture him, Napoleon opened his coat and addressed them, "Soldiers of the Fifth Regime, I am your emperor. If there is a man among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." And no one fired a shot, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur! Vive l'Empereur!" The troops went over to his side, and Napoleon entered Paris in triumph on March 20th, 1815. The powers that had defeated him before pledged once more to fight him again. Napoleon raised another army and moved to attack Allied forces stationed in what is now Belgium. At Waterloo on June the 18th, Napoleon met a combined British and Prussian army under the Duke of Wellington and suffered a bloody defeat. This time, the victorious Allies exiled him to St. Helena, a small forsaken island in the South Atlantic. And so ended the French Revolution, and the Congress of Vienna, that we'll talk about later, will reorder Europe basically under monarchy once again.